Hi everybody, my name is Ramon, and today I am going to show you how I make my Grandma Sadie's tortillas. Tortillas are a wonderful flatbread, soft, pliable, that you can use for many things. You can use them for tacos, for burritos, you can make them big, you can make them small. They're a really good staple item for your dinner table, for breakfast. So I hope that you enjoy this video on making tortillas.
So the ingredients you're going to need to make tortillas are a good all-purpose flour. I like to use unbleached and not enriched. Baking powder, salt, shortening, and 1 2/3 cup warm water. You'll also need 2 tea towels. I like to use a pastry cutter, a rolling pin, and a skillet. My grandmother used to use a comal, which is a handleless round piece of iron, but any type of skillet or cast iron skillet or griddle will work fine.
So here we have our bowl of flour. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of baking powder, the recipe calls for 3 teaspoons of salt, but I usually use just a little bit less than that. You can use sea salt, you can use kosher salt, depending on what you like. Then, when I had tortillas as a little kid, we used to use Crisco. I've tried it with pretty much everything. I've tried it with Crisco, I've tried it with different types of shortening, I've tried it with actual beef tallow and pork lard and other types of fat. And I am using a palm shortening, sustainably sourced. They come out pretty soft, but I think after I get rid of my palm shortening this time, I might actually move over to some sort of other shortening. A lot of people like to blend in the shortening and the baking powder and the salt with their hands. I tend to use a pastry cutter just because I believe it blends it just a little bit better into the flour and gives you a good consistency when the tortillas are actually made. So I just use the pastry cutter, chop up the shortening into the flour to mix the baking powder and the salt. And you shouldn't have any large chunks. It should be distributed evenly throughout the flour. And if you look at the bottom of the bowl, it shouldn't stick to the bowl as well. You should have the shortening throughout the flour mixture alone. Make sure on this step when you're adding the water that the water is warm or a little bit more than warm. You want it to be warm. You want I usually fill up the measuring cup with 2 cups of water, and I'll pour in about 1.5 cups, and then I'll mix with my hand. I'll use my fingers to get most of the water around, scrape the sides, and then I'll start mixing around with my hand. You can use a mixer, like a KitchenAid mixer. I've never used it just because this is the way my grandma used to do it with her hands. And so tradition is a big part of this for me. Actually using my hands and getting this dough worked. You want to be sure that as you are combining these ingredients and the water, that you do not over-knead this. If you over-knead this dough, it's going to become tough, and then the tortillas themselves will be really tough. So you just want to make sure you're kneading it so that the water is evenly distributed throughout the flour, and we have a little bit of flour left on the bottom, so I'm just going to add a little bit more water. And what you're looking for is a wet dough that sticks together, that's kind of tacky, but that doesn't stick to your hands. And you shouldn't have any flour in the bowl. And this is about what it should look like. Nice and smooth, tacky, wet. So we'll take that, we'll cover it with a towel, and we'll let it rest for 45 minutes. Now it's been about 45 minutes, your dough is rested, it's risen a little bit, and it's ready to work. The best technique for dividing up the dough I've found is to roll the dough out into a log with a diameter of about 2 to 3 inches, and then to either use a chef's knife to section it into pieces, or what I do is I just tear it into little pucks. As you're tearing the pucks, you're going to place them under the first tea towel just to stay moist so they don't dry out as you're rolling. Each puck should be about 2 to 3 inches in diameter and about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch thick. You can either leave the pucks as circles. I like to flatten them out a little bit just to prepare them for the rolling process. You should be able to get about 15 pucks from this recipe, between 15 and 20. You'll also prepare the second tea towel for resting the tortillas after they've been cooked. To prepare your skillet, I like to rub a little bit of canola oil into it with a paper towel. And then a technique I use is I keep the paper towel so that I can re-moisten the skillet if it starts to get sticky. I think the most intimidating part of making tortillas is rolling out the dough. I learned a technique from my mom that I'd like to teach you that makes it pretty easy to make consistent, round-shaped tortillas every time. Because the puck is already in a circle, we're going to imagine dividing it into segments and roll in the direction of those segments to stretch the dough. We'll rotate the dough 30 degrees every time and roll away from ourselves and towards ourselves. That way, it's easier to keep the shape and uniformity of the dough. So here we go. We're going to grab a puck and flatten it out a little bit, stretching it ever so slightly like we would pizza dough. Next, we'll flour our rolling surface and we'll put the puck down, flouring one side of the puck. Next, we want to think about the directions in which we're going to roll the puck. We'll think about rolling in a straight line, rotating our dough, and then rolling in a straight line again. You only want to stretch the dough a little bit before you rotate to keep a uniform shape. If you roll too much in one direction, that adds to the oblong shape of the flour as you roll. Because the dough is sticky on one side, it holds the dough as you roll, allowing it to stretch, while the flour on the top side of the dough keeps your rolling pin from sticking to the dough. You'll roll a little bit, rotate, roll a little bit more, rotate, roll a little bit more, rotate, and you should end up with a round tortilla, about a little less than 1/8 of an inch thick. Next, you'll pick up the dough and you'll put it on the skillet, flour side down. The reason you want the flour side down is because sometimes little folds or creases happen, and the flour side down will make it easier to totally flatten out the dough on the skillet. Once on the skillet, the tortilla doesn't have to cook long. Cooks about 30 seconds a side. What you're looking for are little air bubbles to develop. The more air bubbles, the more cooked it is. Wait about 30 seconds and then flip it over with your hand or using a spatula so that the other side can cook. Air bubbles may or may not develop on this second side, which you can or cannot see. But after about 20 to 30 seconds, the tortilla should be done. You could even lift the tortilla off with your hand. Look to see if the air bubbles on the bottom of the tortilla have turned either brown or black, and that means they're done. If it's not, you can just place it back on the skillet and let it cook some more. Once they're cooked on the skillet, you want to place them under the tea towel to steam. Now this is how we get the tortillas soft. By stacking them under a tea towel, they're able to steam one another, making the tortillas soft and pliable and yummy. And that's it. That's my Grandma Sadie's recipe for tortillas. I hope you make lots of tortillas. I hope you eat them and enjoy.
So good. So good.